why don't you introduce yourself and explain kind of what Miskatonic High is, and why you're crossing over and how that's all playing out, and
Yeah,
kind of
absolutely.
what's going on,
Right. So Miskatonic High is the story of 5 teenagers who are taking on Lovecraft monsters in their small town high school, and they are not sure which is worse. From my experience, I'm going to say high school is much, much worse because, even though Lovecraft monsters have tentacles and want to devour you, that's not all that different than high school. And high school, you have to get up early. So my partner and I, Ryan Mendoza, he's the artist on Miskatonic High. We had been doing fan fiction for a while and got to a point where we were really happy with it, with what we were doing. And we're like, why don't we go ahead and make a comic that we can actually put out there and have people read and, actually maybe try and sell 1 or 2 copies. And so we were trying to come up with a concept for it. And Ryan really likes Lovecraft horror. He likes that weird eldritch magic, all of that stuff. And I have a passing knowledge of it. And I was really interested in doing something with, teenage kids, heightened drama, comedy, that sort of thing. And so, his Lovecraft horror, my teenage comedy, and we just stuck them together like a Reese's cup. And so we started doing it, and what we found is people really responded to it. So what you sort of find out there in comics right now, especially in indie comics, is there are a lot of people who are into Lovecraft horror. They really enjoy it. They like it's a unique brand of horror in that there's no devils, there's no angels, there's no real religion to it. It's much more kind of think Jaws. Like Jaws isn't an evil character. He's a shark. He's just trying to eat. The same is sort of true with the monsters in Lovecraft. They are just doing their thing because that's what they do. Humans don't mean anything to them.
It's not really like good versus evil kind of thing. It's more about surviving.
Right, exactly. And surviving things that don't necessarily understand and that you don't necessarily understand. That, the way they think and the way you think, never gonna work together. But there's a lot of Lovecraft fiction out there. There's books, there's movies, they just had like Nick Cage movies going out. But one of the things that we wanted to do was put our own spin on it, be something different. You can do Lovecraft horror to death, and I read a lot of it. I like a lot of it, but we wanted to do something different. And so we brought in the idea of teenagers, we brought in the idea of high school, and then we brought in the idea of sort of tongue-in-cheek comedy, and sort of put it all together and made this nice thing that's like Lovecraft but once removed. It's different, and people really responded to it. I was surprised. I thought we were going to sell like 15 copies of the first issue, and we ended up selling like 500 of them. I was amazed. And people liked it. And one of the things that happened was, as we were putting it out, I started meeting more people in the indie comics community, especially the Lovecraft side of it. And one of the guys who came up to me was this guy named D.W. Kahn, who is the writer and creator of Lovecraft P.I. And so he was getting ready to do a Kickstarter. He's like, would you check it out for me? See what you think, see if you can make any suggestions, help promote it. And I said, sure, I'd be happy to. I'd love to. So I looked at it, and the artwork was amazing. It jumped out at me from the moment that I saw it. But there was more to it than that. What happened was he was doing the same thing. He was taking the idea of Lovecraft, but then taking it in a new direction. So he took the idea of Howard Lovecraft was a sort of, much like me, a dweeby little guy who was sort of a wimp and a writer and all that. And he imagined his life going in a different direction, where he joined up in World War I, saw some strange, crazy crap, became a detective, a supernatural detective with the Miskatonic Detective Agency, and really turned into a noir character. And I really respond to that because I like it when people take this thing and go in a completely new direction and take something new with it. I love noir. I think that's a cool area to explore, to bring this in, to bring the supernatural in. And so I was on board, and then he gave it to me to read. And I really responded to some of the things in it. You know, this idea of a World War I veteran who had sort of been through hell and come back. That's interesting. Another thing about the Lovecraft character in his books is he doesn't see monsters as monsters. He sees them as being equal to people. So, you know, just because you have, you know, tentacles coming out of your neck or whatever, that doesn't make you a bad person. You know, it means you're different, you know, and he's run into plenty of bad people. So, you know, what's a few monsters thrown in? So I really responded to that. You know, it's that thing where if the art is cool, the concept is cool, you pick it up and read it. And then sometimes that's all there is to it. And then sometimes you find something in it and you're like, oh, this is better than I was expecting. And that's what happened to me here. I really responded to it and found something that I wasn't expecting. And I can't remember whether he kicked around the idea of doing a crossover or I kicked around the idea of doing a crossover, but we liked each other's books. We were promoting each other's books. He was taking my books to comic conventions to sell on his table. I was selling his books on our Kickstarters, you know, as add-ons that people could add on and read. And so finally we're like, yeah, why don't we do a crossover? And it was such a crazy idea. We're like, yeah, let's do this.
Yeah, I don't know how or when I saw Miskatonic High come along, but I have participated in a couple, I think like 2 or 3 of the Kickstarters actually. And I have, I don't know, quite a few of the books digitally, I believe, but I haven't actually read any of them, to be honest. But I love your campaigns. Like everything's so set up, and like that's something that catches my attention is how often and how strongly people come back to Kickstarter, you know?
Right.
Like whenever you find the regulars, there's another one, Afterlight Comics. Like every time I've purchased one of their Kickstarters, like everything is delivered like a week after it's over, and like everything goes through. And so that builds like this you know, recognition. Like whenever I see them pop up, I'm like, I don't even need to know anything else about the book. Like I recognize your brand and your quality and stuff. And so Miskatonic's another one of those where I was always impressed with the turnaround. So I was like, I'm going to read these one day. I might as well like helping support this, you know, because we do it all the time with like Marvel or DC or Image books or something. Like we'll just buy books and like never actually read them because one day we might, you know. And so that's how I feel about some of these Kickstarters that are going on these days. And you've been one of those. I've seen LOVECRAFT P.I. on there too. So how long have y'all been doing Kickstarters, and like how long have you been working at this?
We have been working at the comic. I want to say we started throwing around concepts in about 2017. So I think Ryan and I were talking, and basically about 2017, we hit on the idea of a breakfast club from hell, and both really responded to that, and that sort of took us off running. We did this thing. We sort of lucked into it. When we were doing it, we had no clue what we were doing. And so what we did is, rather than what most people do for Kickstarter, which is get 5 pages, a cover, and run to Kickstarter and start their campaign, you know, to get the money to do the rest of the book, we finished 6 books before we ever got to Kickstarter. We had them ready. We were going to approach publishers. We're like, hey, we're completely unknowns. We have no names. We have no brand. You have nothing to sell on. Here, will you buy our book? And unsurprisingly, publishers said, no, we're not going to do that. So we're like, well, crap, what did we make 6 books for then? So we decided, okay, we're going to go to Kickstarter. What do we do? Do we just do it as digital? Do we just give PDFs? I mean, should we give it away? I don't know. And so we decided to do it, and we decided to do the first issue and decided to put it out there. And again, the idea was, I'd been looking at Kickstarter for about 2 or 3 months before we launched our first one, and was just looking at different campaigns and what they did. And without naming any names, because I probably don't even remember the names at this point, people would set their goals too high, and then they wouldn't make them. They would get really depressed, and they would either go away or they'd come back and they'd set them lower at, like, you know, $500 lower or whatever. And my thing was, I have already made the book. I don't care if I sell 15 copies. I don't care if I sell 1 copy, you know, that's a success for me right now. So I'm going to set my goal really, really low. And I'm going to do it print on demand. So the moment somebody buys my book, they've already paid for the printing of that book. So it's all taken care of. So I can sell 1 copy and it's perfectly fine. So I set my goal really low. I said, okay, I'm going to sell 15 copies and this is going to be amazing. And then we put it on there and people responded to it and started doing it. And next thing you know, a whole bunch of people were doing it. And I'm like, I don't know what to do next. So, you know, I found a printer. I'm not going to name names again, but so I was like really excited. I'm like, okay, I'm going to send this to him. And I work in print, you know, my day job, like I do a magazine. And so we have a printer. And so when I send it to them, they immediately start printing it and they bring it back to me like a week later. My comic I sent to this printer and they sat on it for 2.5 months. And then they finally got around to mailing it to me. And it's like, this isn't going to work for me.
Wow.
So we found a printer who specialized in turning things around much, much faster. We figured out how to do fulfillment really fast, which is do as much as you can before you actually get the comics. You know, like print your labels and get your envelopes ready and bag and board things and get all your stuff all set up. And a lot of times people on Kickstarter do this thing where they wait for Kickstarter to give them the money. So the way it works is your campaign ends. About 10 days later, Kickstarter gives you the money that they've collected because they got to go through and they got to charge all the credit cards and everything. And most people wait for those 10 days and then they take that money and then they spend it. And then they have to wait 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever from there. And my thing is, once it ends, I know how much Kickstarter is going to give me. Kickstarter is a reliable company. They're not going to suddenly disappear. I have a credit card. I can buy the things now, get the things in 2 weeks. When I get the money, and I can pay off my credit card then. So we saved 2 weeks there. We've got it down to a science. It's real easy to do fulfillment. We try and keep the cost really, really low because I don't want to charge people more than I have to for this. You know, when we started, we were doing $5 books because that's what it costed, you know, and then we would charge $3 shipping because that's it. You know, I'm happy if somebody wants to give me $2 for a PDF, I'm happy to do that. You know, I don't want to charge you $10 for a PDF because that's ridiculous. I don't want to charge you, you know, $10 for the regular book because that's ridiculous. You know, I want people to read my book. I don't want to make money. If I wanted to make money, I wouldn't be in comics. So yeah, so we've got it down to a science. We work 6 issues ahead. So we've already finished issue 13 and we just did a Kickstarter for issue 9. So we're about 4 issues ahead now, I guess. Plus we did the 2 crossovers. So yeah, that's how we do it. We work really far in advance and we try to get it down to a science and we try not to be stupid about it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know what you mean though, because there are some of those that you know, the turnaround time can be quite long. And there are times where I've received things where I'm like, I forgot I even ordered this, you know?
Yeah, I've gotten those too.
Sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing, you know? It shows up and I'm like, oh, okay.
Well,
Other times,
my thing,
like, oh yeah, I forgot about this one, but now I'm excited to read it. So,
right.
like I said, I think it's really good to be dependable and regular because it builds your customer base. There's a certain expectation that comes with everything, you know?
Right. Well, and that's a big one for us. So, you know, I say this a lot, but I really mean it is, again, I figured I was going to sell those 15 copies and that was going to be it. You know, I figured this isn't going to be a thing. This isn't going to be a thing people are going to want to read regularly or whatever. And people responded to it. And the thing is, I assume most people feel like this, but maybe they don't, is when people give me their money, I feel a sense of debt to them. Like I'm uncomfortable until I've given them the thing that they pay for. I don't want to be in their debt for long. I don't want to do that. You know, I want to give them the thing. They put their trust in me. I need to do everything I can to make sure that I'm worthy of that trust that they put in me. And I'm going to do everything that I can. And I'm always going to do whatever I can because that's a very serious thing for me. So, I know I've talked to enough creators, and I know all the pitfalls that people fall into, and there's so many of them. And that's the reason that these books can get delayed. They have artists who disappear. They have printers who disappear. They have banks that disappear. They have all of these reasons. They go through personal stuff. They go through, they lose a job. They do all these things. They're going through a divorce. All these things can happen that can delay your book. And, the more people you have working on that book, the more easy it is for that to spin out of control, because your letterer disappears, your colorist disappears, these are gig jobs. Nobody's making a lot of money at this stuff. People are doing it on the side of their normal job. Sometimes they're doing it to scrape by. These are tough things. And I understand perfectly how these things can go. And I am eternally lucky that it's just me and Ryan on the book. And, this is his job now. And this is my gig. And it's just the two of us. And we're going to work as hard as we can to make it something that happens. So, yeah, I understand it perfectly, but I hope to God it doesn't happen to us.
Yeah, well, I mean, you got a plan, and that's how you prevent a lot of those pitfalls. So it sounds like you're already ahead of the curve there. So
right, and that's one of the things. So sometimes we get people who come up to us, people who are planning to do Kickstarter, and it's one of those things. If you're on Kickstarter for a while and you have any kind of success at it, a lot of people come up to you and want to know the magic beans, what do I have to plant in order to do this? And you tell them you work really hard, you plan in advance, and one of the things I tell them is plan for success. It could very easily spin one way and you could not be a success, but you could also potentially be a success. And then you're going to want to do issue 2. So why don't you plan for that? I mean, in your head, you're already thinking that this is a 6-issue series, or you're thinking this is, one of a 400 issue series or whatever. Go ahead and start working on number 2, get ahead of the game so that if you are a success and can move forward, do it. You'll be ahead of the game. You want to get in that regular cycle for many reasons. One, show that you're a professional, that you actually know what you're doing. 2, people who read these stories, if I get a comic and I read it and then I have to wait 8 months or a year for issue 2, I'm not going to remember those characters very well. I will probably go back and read issue 1 if I like the series, but there's a good chance that I've already forgotten, whereas if you are coming out every other month, that's a real comic. That's a DC schedule. That's a Dark Horse schedule you're on that people will remember and they will follow you. And if they like your characters, if they like your series, they're going to continue with it and they're going to start to really respond to those characters and they're really going to want to do it. So I love that momentum of it, that month in, month out, you're doing a comic, you're doing a Kickstarter, you're doing a comic, you're doing a Kickstarter. I have always found that I don't hit home runs. I don't have the big success. That's not me. There are people like that, and I'm amazed by them. My thing is I hit singles, but I can hit them regularly. And if I keep hitting singles, eventually I'm going to score a few runs. And that's what I do. So I keep putting out the comic. It doesn't have to be a world beater. I don't have to, be pulling in crazy numbers. I just want to do a regular good comic that people like. And I think if I do, people will respond. And, the thing that surprised me was when we announced the crossover, people got really excited. You've done 8 issues at this point. If you introduce something new and something cool, people are going to respond. And I was surprised by that. I wasn't really expecting it to blow up the way it did.
Yeah, I mean, that's really cool because, that's something that happens, like Marvel, DC, Image has this crossover book coming out right now that is kind of like hinting at that kind of stuff. But I've never really seen like a true like indie or like a Kickstarter series go for the crossover event kind of thing,
Yeah.
and I think like father like daughter, cat cow Calamia, she's working on a crossover with
Yeah.
I think it's called The Last Ember.
Yeah.
But that and this are like the first two like Kickstarter things that I've heard of like crossing over like this. And I think it's just like incredible and speaks to where Kickstarter is, you know, in a way as a publisher, you know, like they're at
Right.
this point where there are long running Kickstarter comics now, you know, and it's not all just like people trying to figure it out and like little one shots coming out and like
Right.
series that people are doing, you know, like you said, like you're in this cycle. It's not the once a month or twice a month schedule that some of the big publishers are doing, but you've built a schedule and your
Right.
audience responds to that because they know it and they understand it. So I guess like how weird was it to you to cross over like a property like this that you've been working on and have to work with another creator to involve their project as well, you know?
Right. So that's two parts. So the first part is you're absolutely right. So it's weird and different and new to have these sort of really indie Kickstarter indies really crossing over with each other. And yeah, I know Kat was talking to her and I'm so excited to read what she's got going. I've been following that comic for a while. And
Yeah.
one of the thing about it is, and the thing that I've really come to like about Kickstarter comics is they're beholden to no one. You know, it's a true place where you can have indie comics, you know. There's no editors telling you what to do. There's no censors saying you got to do this, you got to do that. And it's really like the Wild West. You have all these different kinds of comics. You want nudie comics, you got nudie comics. You got, you know, you want Comicsgate comics, you got Comicsgate comics. You want anything in between that you can find. You can find nice comics, you can find mean comics, you can find horror comics, you can find sci-fi comics, you can find superhero comics, you can find everything. And they can do whatever they want because they don't answer to anybody except for the readers. It's amazing. It's, you know, when you think about it, you're like, why aren't more comics like that? That's how it should be.
Yeah.
So DW, the guy who does Lovecraft P.I, we're kicking around this idea of a crossover, and I responded to immediately. I love experimenting, trying new things. It's just something that I respond to. I really like it. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to take this back to Ryan, and I don't know if he's going to like it or want to draw it or anything like that. So I took it to him and I said, hey, do you want to do this? And he's like, yes, let's do this. And so we did. We just jumped into it. And that's the great thing about being an indie comic is, and working 4 issues in advance, you know, we can say, okay, right now we're doing a crossover. We don't have to schedule it out. We don't have to get it on the editorial calendar or anything like that. We can just do it. You know, so that was really, really exciting. And then, you know, the actual prospect of doing a crossover with somebody else, with another writer, was really, really scary. You know, because you have been writing these characters for 8 or 9 issues now. You know who they are. You know what how they talk. You know how they act. You know all these things. And now you're going to turn them over to some other writer. And it's like, oh, I don't know about this. But again, that's the experimenting part of it is, you know, if you want to do different things, you got to go out of your comfort zone. And so that's what we did. And you know, the great thing about DW and working with him is we both sort of checked our egos at the door. And it's like, whoever had the better idea, we just went with it. And, you know, he did this, I did that. You know, I wrote most of the first one, you know, because the way we did it was, I don't know if you're old enough for this, but when I was a kid, Magnum P.I came on, and then Simon and Simon came on immediately after that. And when I was a kid, one time they had this crossover where Simon and Simon, the brother P.I, showed up on Magnum P.I in Hawaii, and they started doing stuff. And then Magnum went to San Diego, where the Simon and Simon were from. And it was like, shows could do that? I had no idea. Actually, I don't think Magnum went to San Diego because I think Tom Selleck was out of their budget range, and so it was probably Higgins. But anyway, only 3 people who are old enough get that joke. So the way we sort of set it up was the first issue would be a Miskatonic High issue. So it would be set in Miskatonic High. We would draw it. I would write it. It would bring Lovecraft into our timeline. And then the second issue would take our kids back to his timeline. He would write it. His guy would draw it. And it would be a Lovecraft P.I. issue. And so I wrote my issue. We plotted the whole thing out. I wrote my issue. And I realized once I was done, I didn't have Lovecraft P.I.'s voice right. Like, you know that thing where you can tell when there's another writer writing somebody's dialogue and it doesn't sound right, and you're like, this is crap. So
yeah, well, that was actually something I was really interested in, because you've done so many issues of Miskatonic. Like, I would believe you have those characters and the story and stuff. That's got to be the really weird part to me, is bringing somebody else's character in and having to find their voice, and even on the art side, like finding a good style that matches your world and everything, you know, for that character. So I guess like that's a really big question that I wanted to ask you, more or less, is like, how do you do that? You know, how do you pull it in? You said you wrote a whole script and you hadn't even, you felt like you didn't have his voice. So where does it go from there, you know?
Right. So the nice thing was we sort of had the situations in place. So with the way I write two things. One, it's either where's the action point, like the horror point, where's the monster going to come in and do his thing? And the other one is, where are the jokes? Like, you know, make sure that you get the jokes in. And is there a really funny thing that you can do? And so I sort of had that in the script. Like, I knew we have one point where Lovecraft P.I., he's a private detective from 1930s coming into modern times, and he wants to make a phone call. And so he's like, take me to the nearest phone box. And they're like, what the heck is a phone box? And he's like, you know, that's where you call the police. And they're like, okay, well, here, you know, use my phone. And he's like, what is this? It's very sparkly. And so he uses this teenage girl's phone and calls, and he gets a hold of Siri, and he's having a conversation with Siri. And, you know, that was ripe for so many jokes. And, you know, so I had all that, but it was just the nuances of his dialogue wasn't there. You know, it's like the wording wasn't there. And so what we decided to do, and again, thank God that DW, you know, was like he is, because I could say to him, hey, look, I've done the script. Would you do a pass on it? You know, especially Lovecraft P.I.'s dialogue, and just get it so it has your voice, so it sounds like, you know, I want people who are Lovecraft P.I. fans to read this and say, yes, that's Lovecraft P.I. You know, that's Detective Ward Lovecraft. I know that character, you know. And he said, yeah, absolutely. And so he did his thing, and it was so much better after he did it. And then he wrote his script, and he's like, look, would you do the same thing? You know, come and look at the teenagers and, you know, write their, you know, tweak their dialogue just enough so that it sounds like them. And so that's what we did. And, you know, it worked out so much better because it has both voices to it through the whole thing. So it feels like a piece rather than, you know, this is this piece, that's that piece. It's got two different tones. It just feels like a whole thing. It just reads really well. And, you know, the other part of it is that I got lucky on was we're different kinds of writers. So I get really into ideas. Like, I want to explore an idea. Like, I can spend, you know, 10 pages just talking about an idea of, you know, how this thing works, how this monster works. And so that was sort of what the first one was, to explain who this monster is that came crashing to Earth, you know, and she's, you know, a famous character if you're into Lovecraft, you know, and she has 1,000 young, and she, you know, it's a terrible thing. And so, you know, the idea was to combine her with the myth of Medusa and all of this to show that she had been on Earth for a long, long, long time. And so sort of ran with it. And, you know, I had so much fun going through the mechanics of how the monster worked, how the aliens worked, how all of it worked. And that's great, but for a setup issue. But for the second issue, you really need to turn on the action. You know, you want to get bang, 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 bang. And so fortunately, DW has sort of a movie background. He's worked on independent films and horror films and low budget films and stuff like that. And so one of the things that I really responded to in his books is they have a very cinematic feel to it, especially the action. And so so he did the second one. And so it's set in 1932. I'm going to make this history as unboring as I possibly can. 1932, it's the height of the Great Depression. In Washington, D.C., World War I veterans show up, and they're really ticked off because the U.S. government promised them a wartime bonus that they never paid. And so they came and they camped out in Washington, D.C., and President Roosevelt turned on the army on them and basically ran them out of Washington, brought out the tanks, all of this, and really just ran them out of Washington, D.C., and it was crazy and insane. And so since I like crazy and insane, we decided, okay, let's have it happen then with, so have all that happening and an alien eating people. And if they don't take care of it, it's going to destroy the earth. Because, yeah, that sounds fun. So DW ran with it. He brought in the tanks, he brought in the motorcycles, he brought in horseback riding, grenades, rifles, all of this stuff. And on the script, it read really well. But then I saw him do he sent it to Daniel, who did the art on it, and sent it back. And I swear to God, it looks so great. It looked like something out of Indiana Jones, remember Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade where he's fighting the tank, and he's jumping on horseback and he's riding around. And it's like, oh my God, this is that good. And it's so cinematic. It plays so well. And it kills as an ending, and it works so perfect. And sometimes you get lucky and sometimes you plan for that luck. But in this case, I don't know. We were just lucky that he was so good at that, and I was good at the setup, that it worked perfectly for us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, luck is just what preparation meets opportunity.
Right. Right. Or fall on your ass luck.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's definitely an element of being prepared. Let's see if he can.
Oh, hey, here's the DW. Maybe.
Yeah, I'm just seeing a blank screen though. I was waiting to see if he would get if it would pop up. But he's just showing a blank screen.
He says he's working on it.
Okay.
Who knows? Here's our ghostwriter, DW.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, kind of the reason I was asking is because I haven't read any of MISKATONIC HIGH. I haven't read any of LOVECRAFT P.I. Mm-hmm. But like I said, I've seen all this stuff. I have a couple of books of Miskatonic, so I kind of had an idea of what these characters look like, and kind of a little bit, So when I started reading the first one of the things that stood out to me was the characters feel like they're different, like they're from different books, different writers and stuff, but they also feel the same, basically like you went on to describe in the process, finding the voices and having the other writer kind of punch up the dialogue to get there. But it's really cool because it reminds me of those episodes of Scooby-Doo where they would have it felt exactly like that, in all the good ways, to me, whenever they met Batman and Robin, they felt like the Batman and Robin from the show, but they also fit into the world they were in,
Well, yeah. Well, and they had Adam West and they had Burt Ward, so it was that is Batman, that is Robin that they're talking with, and that's exactly it. We have on this latest Kickstarter, we have a variant cover where the Miskatonic High kids are dressed up like Scooby-Doo. Because we love that idea of, Scooby-Doo meets Batman. It's Miskatonic High meets Lovecraft P.I. And so, and then we have another one where to get in that timeline of Abbott and Costello meet the Wolfman. And so, the Lovecraft is Abbott and Costello, and he's meeting our kids who are dressed up like monsters. So, yeah, I mean, here's the thing, and I've talked to some people about this, is that idea of mixing characters from one universe with another one has been with us forever. It really has, and as technology has allowed it, it's just more and more fun. And I think that's one of the things that happened with that we learned by doing this crossover is people love that. People want to see your characters interact with other characters. I get some people who are like, yeah, have Batman in your comic. And I'm like, I don't think Warner Brothers is going to approve of that. But you know what I mean? It's that's the great thing about imagination, is it allows you to bring these different characters together and do things in different ways. And the great thing about what's happening on Kickstarter with the indie comics is the imagination is really your limit. You can do whatever you want. You are in charge of it. The only people you answer to are the people who are reading this thing who want those things in the first place. So if you're creating something with imagination that feels new or different or those things, people are going to respond to those things, you know? I was telling you before that people come to me and say, you know, how do I make my Kickstarter comic a success? And, you know, one of the things you tell them before anything else is, what's good about your comic? You know, why is your comic different? Don't just say, you know, it's Batman without the ears, or it's Wolverine with the claws coming out of his toes instead of his fingers or whatever. You know, it's really create something different and unique, and then think about who your audience is and why they want to read it. And if you can make that pitch about why it's different, why it's cool, why it's important to you, people are going to respond, because that's why they're on Kickstarter in the first place, is because they want something different. You know, I've read Marvel comics for a long time. I've read DC comics for a long time, and a lot of stuff happens, and it's always world ending, and it's always, you know, they're resetting the universe, and Batman's going to have a new origin, or there's going to be somebody new wearing the cowl or whatnot. And it's like, I've read that. I don't want to read it again. Please don't make me read it again. I don't even want to see that movie anymore. You know, but if you want to take it in a new way and say, okay, what if Batman, you know, was an alien, and instead of Batman, he was, you know, Robin Hood, you know, and let's set it back in Robin Hood days. And DC Comics is going to take one look at that and say, no, we're not going to do that. And that's exactly the reason to do it, is if the people who are making these decisions are counting the beans and the dollars and saying, you're not going to make any money at this, and you still want to do it, that's the reason to do it, because you're invested in it. And what we're investing in Kickstarter is not necessarily the concept or the writing. We're investing in the creators. You know, bring your best game to it, bring something new and something exciting, and that's what we're going to respond to. I get a little excited about it. I'm sorry.
No, yeah, because I mean, you were talking about it a little bit earlier as well. You know, like Kickstarter is, especially for comic books, is kind of the Wild West. You know, and it just makes me think of like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and like the Mirage era and stuff.
Yeah.
Like what indie was then before. I say this non-pejoratively, but the, you know, Image kind of commercialized indie.
Yes.
And before that, there was like this indie scene that reminds me a lot of what we're seeing on Kickstarter, where there are no rules, there is no government, there is no like comics code or whatever. You know, like people can do anything, and they're creating these projects and these characters that they're very passionate about. And I think it's awesome because, like you said, these corporations, everything is data driven. So everything is calculated. So they're never accidentally going to find something amazing. Everything's already planned for, you know, and that's where, like you said, like they won't do it because they can't guarantee it's going to return a profit, but nothing's stopping you from doing it. So take that idea and run with it, you know?
Right. And it's exactly what you're saying. You know, I was thinking about this just recently because my friend was talking about Dave Sim and Cerebus, and how that is a comic that no one would greenlight. Think about this. It's an aardvark parody of Conan the Barbarian, but then it has Marx Brothers in it. And it's also, you know, a commentary about men and women's, you know, personalities and all these things. And whatever you might think of that comic, and it went through 300 issues. So, it, you know, God knows it went through a lot, and you can think whatever you want about it. But he didn't do that with the idea that he was going to create a whole stable of titles and, you know, turn it into another universe, and, you know, they're going to fight Superman. He did it because these are stories he wants to tell, and he was just putting the issues out, and people responded and bought it, and then he put more issues out. And the way that he did it, he just did it in his garage. You know, he started selling comics, and you know, I think of that, and I think of Love and Rockets, and you know, again, I'm dating myself, because for me, you know, the indie scene was really the 80s, where, you know, you really could do anything. You know, here's a story about, Latino girls in a sort of futuristic LA, and they have relationship problems. And it's like, that's a comic, and I'm going to put it out, and it's going to be, I don't care whether it's successful. I just got to do it. And they did it. And, for me, where I am now, and, having the conversations with Ryan, and, again, we've done 9 issues on Kickstarter. The conversation stops being about, what's the next one going to be? And the conversation starts being about, where are we going with this? How long can we do it? And my heroes, are the people who kept doing it. The way that they became successful was that not necessarily that they were geniuses or that they hit home runs. It's that they did 300 issues, that the Hernandez brothers are still putting out Love and Rockets. Their longevity is what is a major force for them that people respond to. It's because not only are they geniuses, but they kept doing it. And the thing that I've seen with Kickstarter, the other thing is, it's a hard thing to do, and people find that it's a hard thing to do, and lots of people don't like doing hard things, so they do a few issues and then they don't do issues anymore. And there are so many reasons to quit. I will tell you that shipping is a terrible, terrible thing. I hate dealing with the Postal Service. Printers can be a pain in the ass. Doing script rewrites can be a pain in the ass. All of these things are really hard and they're difficult. And I don't watch TV anymore because I don't have time. I drive my wife crazy because we'll be sitting there after dinner, after we put the kids to bed, and I will be stuffing bags and boards. That's my that's my pastime now, is I stuff bags and boards, because it's really amazing lifestyle being a Kickstarter comic person. But there's so many reasons to quit, and lots of people do, and you sort of have to find it within yourself and say, look, this is the comic I want to do. I get so much joy out of writing these stories, that because they're different and they're personal, and these are stories I want to do. For me, it's not just a story about horror monsters and kids making jokes. It's also the story of kids who are dealing with a world where there are monsters who want to destroy them. Some of them have tentacles, and some of them are teachers. Some of them are other students who just want to grind them down because they feel terrible about themselves. There's all this stuff in the world that they're dealing with that are really horror situations before you even introduce the monsters to it. And that's, I love telling those stories and mixing it all together and finding that mix where you have just the right amount of horror and you have just the right amount of comedy, and you just get this little bit of, the feels, where you're like, yeah, okay, you respond to the characters. And I want to do that. And, whenever I have to deal with the Postal Service, or whenever I have to deal with shipping crap or any of that stuff, I look at inside and say, look, this is what really drives me, is I love telling these stories. I want to do it for a long time. I have an artist who is really into doing it, who is great at doing it. People love to joke about how it's Archie meets, horror monsters. And I love that. I love that style because it works perfectly for our comic. And he wants to do it for a long time. And so let's buck the trend. Let's not quit. When all those hardships come along that would make it so easy to just walk away, let's just not do it. Let's just not walk away. Let's just keep doing it, and let's do it as long as we can. And if we get lucky and we put out 300 issues of this, it'll have been worthwhile.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's it seems like everything we do, it starts out a lot of fun, and then at some point you hit this wall of adversity, and it almost always comes down to, like, there's a million reasons to quit, but, like, if you can find that one reason to keep going, then it pays off. When you cross that adversity, when you put that book out and, like, somebody gets that in their hand, like, you made it, like, you did it. And that's worth, just not giving up all those times, all those opportunities you have to quit. There's so many, like, exits, but if you just road. There's something on the other side.
Right. It's really like being in a plane with no windows. It's like there's a lot of exits. The real hard part is to stay in the plane. Yeah, that's exactly it. And but I run into these people all the time. Comic book friends, people who have harbored the dream of doing a comic book for ages and ages and ages and ages. And I understand that. And then they come up with all these excuses why they don't do it. Like, oh, work's too busy, or, I just had a kid. I can't do it. Or, I don't have the money. I can't draw. There's so many excuses why you don't do it. And I know those because I used those excuses for about 10 years and just didn't do all the things that I wanted to do. And I fell into luck by finding Ryan, and he liked to do the comics that I like to do. And we found out that we were actually decent at it. And then we found out that we could put it on Kickstarter and people would actually buy it and respond to it. And people would write to us and say, hey, this is a really good issue. I buy these whenever they come out, and these are the first things that I put on the top of my read pile. And, when that happens, it's like, I'm never going back to it. I'm never stopping, because I don't want to be that person. And I encourage everybody who wants to do it. It is so much easier now to do it. You can find artists, you can find the time to do it. You can find a way to put it on Kickstarter, and you can sell it, and you can sell enough that you can just barely manage to scrape by. And that's success.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many like negative impacts that people observe all the time about like social media and the internet and everything. But that's also the brilliance of it. The fact that we can reach across the world and find anybody,
Right.
I talk to people like every week, just like you, that are in completely different places than me, but that's what makes it also amazing. And it makes it so much more possible, because there was a time where you kind of had to have this opportunity to meet certain people that were in that industry, and you had to meet them physically, like you weren't going to stumble across them just broadcasting themselves on Twitter, you had to look for these people and find these people, and so it makes it that much harder to understand, like, why wait, everything's there now. Like, you just have to work toward it, because like you said, you made those excuses for 10 years, but imagine if you had started 10 years earlier, how much more experience you would have,
Right. But I also think about, like 10 years ago, I don't really remember, but there wasn't really a Kickstarter that you could do. So you were hoping to get into the previews book. And if you know anything about the previews book, you know that if you're starting out and doing an indie comic, you're not getting in the previews book. So maybe you're going to your local conventions and you're setting up a table and you're actually like a circus marker calling to people, trying to tempt them to come in and see your freak show of a comic and maybe buy it. It's like, hey, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, check this out. See this, and it's like, that's how people do it. And I have nothing but awe and respect for the people who did it that way. It is so much easier than that now because of social media. There's the opportunity that you can put your images out there, that people can see them, that they can respond to them. And because Kickstarter is what it is, and because it's recognized, and because there's a whole comics community already on there, it is so much easier to do that now. And that technology, like that, to me, that's a Nobel Prize winning thing right there, is because you have put what Kickstarter did, what social media did, was put the tools in the hands of anybody who wants to do it. Anybody can do this. This is true democracy. You want to do a comic about, whatever crazy idea that you have, you can, and you can put it on there and you can see if people will buy it. Again, it's the Wild West thing, but it's also pure democracy, because your ideas are what you're putting out there, and people will decide for themselves with their dollars whether they like that idea or not, whether they want to support that idea or not. And that's amazing. This is exactly what we need, at a time when the big comics are, going through what they're going. DC is talking about, firing people, moving away from regular comics, putting out just trades in Walmart or whatever. And it's like, now is the time more than ever when we need someplace where comics can go and just be this little art form. I think back again to again, I don't know why, but I think of the 80s, you know, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Love and Rockets, you know, Cerebus, all of them coming out, and they said they weren't planning on making money. They were planning on making black and white comics that cost next to nothing and that they would make next to nothing on, and they would just put them out, and they would just, you know, if they sold 10 of them, they'd be happy, you know. And that's to me what comics is. Forget the money. Forget trying to sell your IP to TV or movies or Netflix or whatever. Like, you're hoping that, well, you know, I have this screenplay, so I'll turn it into a comic. And then, you know, the movie studios will see the comic and buy it and turn it into the movie. That's my plan. And it's like, no, that's not what comics is. Comics is about telling stories in ways that only comics can, because comics is a unique art form that's unlike anything else. It's not movies, it's not TV. Do a comic, put it out there, people will respond to it, and it just let it be this cool little community that people like. And I don't know, that's me.
Oh no, I agree with you, because I feel like, I mean, we've obviously hit this point where people are turning to comics to create an idea that they have to put on screen, you know?
Yeah.
But I do also feel like we're hitting the saturation point where the people, like the people that you were talking about, right? These ones that are getting turned into TV shows and stuff, like, say what you want. I mean, Kirkman did not write The Walking Dead to become the #1 show ever, you know?
Right.
Like, these are people that started out passionately. Preacher was not written to go on TV. It was written as a comic. Like, there has to be passion behind it. And, you know, like, I really like, I don't know, like AWA, they started bringing out their books. And, like, I think they got a lot of, like, really talented legendary creators there. And they're making, like, very solid comic books. But they're very safe in the comic book format. Like, they're not pushing any boundaries or testing any new ideas. And it's clearly because AWA is they're banking on getting these properties picked up by TV and movies, you know? And to me, like, that's one of the reasons I haven't latched on to a lot of AWA properties, is because I'm like, yeah, they're clearly well crafted, but I like things that are doing something different, that are pushing certain boundaries. And AWA is not doing that. They're trying to get picked up by a movie, and I feel it when I read their books, you know? And so it turns me away. I like comics that are made to be a comic, you know?
Right. Well, and again, I come from a time when, you know, comics were intended to be comics, and they could be cool only as comics. So, you know, the ones that I like are really experimental comics. You know, there's this little comic book creator you may have heard of named Alan Moore, who writes comic books, and they can only be comic books because we've seen the movies several times and they are not the comic books. And the thing about it is, he did things with page construction, and he did things with story and formatting and the format of the comic so that it could only be a comic book. I was reading one of his, and it was modeled after a choose your own adventure. You can't make that into a movie. That is a comic book, because a comic book you can flip back and forth, you know. And he had another one where it was based upon trading cards. You know, the story was the trading cards, and so you could follow it on the trading cards, but you could mix and match the trading cards. And it's just thinking as though comics were the end of the medium rather than the beginning. You know, it's like, this isn't my screenplay to get to Hollywood. This is
a story.
Only something that can be done in comics.
Yeah. And I mean, to me, like, when I say, like, pushing the boundaries and thinking different, like, Undiscovered Country is a book that operates almost solely in wide panel pages. That looks cool because it's different from every other comic book I'm reading, you know? Alienated from Boom Studios, like, the splash panels, the way that they could tell, like, they could tell the whole turning key moment for 3 different characters, all in a single splash, you know? And these characters, they were communicating through thought, and so they like color coded all the dialogue, and it's just different from every other book I grab on the shelf. I'm always excited to read it to see how they're going to push the boundaries, you know?
That's exactly what, you know, we want. And that's what I'm excited about. I was just looking at Kickstarter, and I was talking with somebody who's got a new book that they're putting in. I can't remember the name of it, unfortunately. And I was looking at it, and the page went from like this to like that, where you would actually turn the comic to be able to read it. I'm like, that is so cool. I love that, you know, because that can only be done as a comic. It's taking this thing and experimenting with it in new ways, in different ways, to make it the best comic that it can. And they're obviously not thinking about, oh, well, you know, when the movie comes out, they're just going to turn the screen like this and watch it on their phones. It's like, no, they're not. They're thinking that it's going to be a comic book. They're trying to make the best comic book they can. And that's what I want. That's what I want to read, you know? Mm-hmm. And I love a good story. I'm perfectly happy with, you know, and I read plenty of them where it's just a cool story. But what I like about it, you know, the comics that I read, you know, I'm reading this one called Natalie Unseen, and it's a psychological thriller about this lady up in New England, and she runs into this house, and it's mixed with, I believe it's a Korean folktale told through anthropomorphic characters. So it's like Lord Fox and, you know, Lady Mouse and all these things. And it's like, nobody in their right mind would make that story because it's mixing too many different things, and your audience will get confused. And how are we going to market this? You know, how are we going to do anthropomorphic characters? That's going to be too much CGI. And in comics, it works brilliantly. And, you know, with comics, the artist is I still feel like the art is the king. You know, it's like you look at the book before you read the book. And if the art looks good, you're going to be open to that story. And so, you know, this happens to have art that's really, really good. So I responded to it quickly, and I started reading it, and I fell in love with the story. And so now I read it, and they only do it, I believe, through Patreon right now. And so that's the only way I can read it. You know, and I read another one, which was just an anthology of people who were out of time in one way or another. It was like 7 different stories about people who are out of time phase one way or another, and nobody in their right mind is going to make that into a movie or a TV show, but it's a brilliant comic, and I want to read that because it's pushing boundaries. And after I would finish the story, I would go and start it again to see how it all worked through in a different sort, to understand the way they were out of phase with time. You know, none of these are Captain America, you know, beating up on whoever. And I'm not saying that that's bad, because Captain America has his place. They, you know, Thanos have their place. I love the Marvel movies. I'm introducing my kids to them, you know, as a way to introduce superheroes and comics and all that. And I think they're great. But people who are trying to do that on Kickstarter are usually hurting themselves because they're not taking that next step to really do something new and different and find their own voice that you're really going to want to read and respond to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's key to it, you know, because I read like Thor, and I've picked up King in Black because that's going on.
Oh, how is that?
I've only read the first issue of it so far, and I don't read any of the tie-ins because I'm not really into the universe thing. But the first issue was really cool. The way they set up the event and stuff is really cool. Like, it's essentially like that first issue. It feels like Donny Cates just gives you everything that you expected to happen in the event, you know? So like I think everybody has expectations going into that. And it felt like he gave the whole event to you in the first issue. So now we're left to be able to be surprised, you know? Now everything he does is going to be surprising because you planned it out in your head and he already gave you all that. So now what?
Yep. So, you know, well, it's kind of like when you read those stories where, like, one of the story that I go back to is, you know, Stephen King's The Stand, which was, you know, when I first read that, I was like, oh, cool, this is going to be a story about the end of the world. And the end of the world happens in like the first 100 pages, and then there's like 800 more pages. And that's amazing to me because it's like, he could have just done a story about the end of the world, but no, that was just the start. It's like, then the real story kicks in. And I love that, you know, that changing expectations, you know, it was kind of like Saga when I first started reading it. Like, I expected it to be a certain thing, and then it became something completely different. And it's like, okay, I will follow this because it is different.
Yeah. Do you know anything about Crossover? Have you been reading that? Or
I haven't. I have not. So is it good?
Well, see, my thing was like, I was like, I'm not really that interested in this because I know how like Donnie Cates is kind of a fanboy, and so I
Mhm.
figured it was going to be like a bunch of like '90s
Mm.
Marvel and DC references and stuff, and I was like, that's
Yep.
not really my jam, you know.
Right.
And again, the first issue is kind of like, here's everything you're expecting,
Mhm.
and then the second issue, it really got interesting because he starts
Right.
to introduce this concept that the person narrating this story is
Mhm.
him
Mhm.
writing this story.
Oh, nice.
And you start seeing panels get like almost like dismantled. Like some panels will just randomly be in like the blue line
Mhm.
pencil, you know.
Yep.
The book is being made and written before your eyes. And the third one kind of expands on that idea. And I obviously don't know where it's all going to go. I don't know how well it's going to land, you know, 6 issues in or whatever.
Right.
But honestly, right now, I feel like what he's doing is kind of like what Alan Moore did with Watchmen, where it was like this revolutionary deconstruction of superheroes.
Mhm.
It feels like Donnie Cates might actually be doing like a revolutionary deconstruction of comic book fandom. And
Right.
that I think could be really interesting if he sticks the landing.
Right. And that's one of the things that I really like is, getting back to that feeling of when you were whatever you were and you collected floppies. It's like I run into a lot of people and they just read trades, and that's fine. I have no problem with that. But for me, there's something really pure about the floppy, which is, you get this issue, you read it, you can't immediately read the next one. You got to wait until they put out the next one, and you got to actually think about what you read, and it's got to stick in with you, like, oh my god, how are they going to pull this out? Or, are they even going to pull this out? Or do I even care whether they pull this out? You go through all those questions in your head, and it's like, then you get to the next one and you're like, oh, I see what you're doing. And then it goes into a completely different way. And, you know, for the way we do our comic, we do single issue stories. They're all single issue stories, except for one of them, which was a two-parter. But that was the idea was, we did it for a number of reasons. One, we knew that people were going to be coming onto it, picking up book, number 3 for the first one is going to be the first one they read. And so that's fine. So, we wanted to make it so that they could, but also I like the idea of the beginning, the middle, and the end being all right there in one floppy issue, and then the next issue, you don't know what's coming next. It's not like a Bendis story where it's going to be the same conversation for three comic books. It's going to be something new. It's going to be different. And, for our first book, we did 6 issues and we focused on a different character for each one. And so you read it and you got who that character was, and sort of all the other characters were around them, and you started to form judgments on those other characters. And then you read the next one and you're like, now you're seeing it from their point of view, and you're like, oh, maybe those judgments weren't quite right about that person. And then you do their story, and they have their own monsters that they're dealing with, and then you do the next one. And so we wanted to do it that way to really make it easy for people who are finding our book to read the floppy, to really enjoy a floppy, rather than, okay, well, I'm going to wait till you put out the trade and then I'm going to read it. We really want to make it so that, people could pick up a floppy and just really enjoy that floppy. And that's something, you speaking to it about crossover, but there's a number of things, books like that where I just want to enjoy the floppy and then move on. I don't want to wait 6 months and get the trade and then read it all and then wait another 6 months and get the next trade or whatever. It's just, that to me is comics. Again, I harken back to old school because, I'm getting old. But I like those things, and I feel like some of those things got lost in the way that we tell stories now. And so let's be different. Let's try different things, and let's try some old ideas that we really actually liked. So
Yeah, I agree because Robert Kirkman and Chris Samney, they have this book going on right now called Crossover.
Mhm.
And every issue is like very fast paced and very like action driven, and even though like it's a full book, it can feel pretty fast at times. And so
Right.
I've had these conversations lately. A lot of people are thinking about dropping it, and I'll
Mhm.
just pick it up in the trade, and
Mhm.
like I understand why. Like I just told you, like I understand the reasoning, because you pick up the book and you feel like you're not getting a full value every month because it reads so smooth and so quick, But I told him, I was like, me personally, like it just feels pure. Like the way he writes each of those issues, like I love the anticipation of getting that floppy and then reading it and just like enjoying it and rereading it and like savoring it, and not every book does that anymore. There's a lot of writers that don't write like that anymore. And I don't know, I just really enjoy the way that Kirkman and Samney are putting that book together because it is like Undiscovered Country is one that I dropped because it's such a like dense read, it's like 22 pages and it feels like you're reading a novel every month. And then I do not remember everything that I picked up last month, And so that's one I had to drop because I'm like, I'm just going to read this in trade because every time that I do get one, I end up having to read 3 issues to remember.
You have to remember where it was.
Yeah, so I get it. Like different storytelling types, different books, and different. But I do agree with you. Usagi Yojimbo is another one I pick up every month. I'm just like, I cannot wait to read this. Like I love the monthly read of it.
Right. And the thing about it is, it's almost always it's going to be a self-contained story. You can just read it, you get the story, and then you're out. You don't have to, deal with this whole mythology of remember, 6 issues back or 12 issues back, and then we destroyed the world, and then we came back and did all this. And again, part of what I've been looking at is because I have kids, I have a 7-year-old and I have a 10-year-old. And so, before COVID, I would take them to the library, and there's a whole section on graphic novels for kids, and here's the thing about being a parent is on TV, they'll make it look like you influence your kids in what they like. And the truth is they influence you on what you like. So my kids like certain things and they pick up certain things. And so, my son picked up the Raina Telgemeier. Yeah.
That Luffy.
So my kid picks up like, the Raina Telgemeier books, like Smile and Guts and all of those. And so I started reading those and they're really good. And my son started picking up the, oh God, what are they? The Hazardous Tales. The Hazardous Tales books, and they're really good, and they're about like American history told through comic books, and they are so good. And I started reading those things, and I started looking around, and it happened to be at about the same time as DC was doing their thing and falling apart and all of that. And somebody put out this chart, and they showed market share, and I kid you not, Scholastic has 40% of the market share of comics in this country. They have more than Marvel. They have more than DC. They have more than anybody else because kids are reading these comics. They're not superhero comics. I can't even define these comics because they're so wide ranging, between confessional stories, kids stories.
My kid has a Dogman book right there.
Yeah, exactly. Dogman, Captain Underpants, all of those,
Diary of a Wimpy Kid.
Right. And the thing is, I read them and they're designed to be read for kids and adults and all of these things. And, the thing that changed as we were putting out our comic was, I thought we were putting out a horror comic for teenagers and adults. And then then several adults wrote to me and said, oh yeah, I gave this to my 10-year-old and he loves it. Can you send me more? And so responding to it is, I had this conversation recently with a friend of mine, and we were talking about how, going back to the old Stan Lee days, when Stan Lee was doing Marvel, the idea was anybody could pick up that comic book. It could be a GI, it could be a kid, it could be a grandparent, it could be anybody can pick it up, can know what's going on, can follow the story, and will get the story and can enjoy it. It's written for all ages. And for a long time, all ages was a naughty word. You didn't say all ages because that meant you were writing for kids. And the thing about it is, kids like comics, adults like comics. Let's give them good comics, and that's what I found in Scholastic, and that sort of influenced some of my storytelling is I know that anybody can read this. I'm going to write this for any audience and they're going to enjoy it. And I can write it for kids and they can get certain things. And I can write it for adults and they're going to get certain things and they're going to enjoy it. And I'm not going to be limited by it's got to be superheroes or it's got to be this. You know, they do everything. You know, they put out the reprints of Bone. They put out, you know, comedy. They do, you know, all kinds of things. And so, you know, to me, they are sort of the smart people in the room. It's like everybody else is doing their stupid thing because they've been doing it for so long. And you look at them and they're the smart kids in the room who are doing the thing that they want to do, putting out good comics with good voices, with good artists, and they're not limited by, you know, characters or anything like that. And they're just doing it. And that's the model that I think more creators should be striving for, is again, not to be another DC, not to be another Marvel. Be like Scholastic.
Yeah. Well, I speak to this often because, like, with any industry, I have a problem with when they get into this groove, right? They tend to focus on creating this thing. Like, it has to be this thing, you know, this is what comics are, so we're making comics. And they're not looking at the result. Like, let's find a way to get to the result we want, not a way to do the process that we know.
Right.
You know, and I think that's why Scholastic is kicking butt right now, because, and you see it a lot in the comic community, because if you ask like comic enthusiasts, if you ask them like who prints the most comic books, then they're going to go, oh, well, Marvel and DC and Image. You're like, okay, but all of that exists within the scope of sequential art.
Right.
So now if you look at it from the scope of sequential art, who's doing this?
Right.
Well, Viz Media with all the Japanese manga that they're doing, Line Webtoon, the Webtoon app, like they have millions of subscribers. They are got more eyeballs on their stuff than Marvel and DC sell in books.
Right.
I mean, you know, and then Scholastic, because they're in schools, they're in book fairs.
Right.
And I think a lot of the Scholastic books, the genius to them, like you were talking about, like these kids, they want something. They're expected to read books in school. Their novels are socially acceptable, but comic books are nerdy. And so what these creators found was, if I take something like Diary of a Wimpy Kid or Dogman, and I put a novel and like prose style stuff, but every so many pages I put in like some animations and like some little cartoon characters and put like some sequential art laced throughout this book, suddenly kids feel more confident because they can read that whole novel super fast. And when you can complete something, you feel like completing something else.
Right.
But like when I was growing up, when they were teaching you to read, they're like, all right, and now you got to read this chapter book. And you're like, well, crap, like I'm in 3rd grade and I don't think I ever finished reading a book, because when you're trying to sound out every word, you never get to the end of a 90-page novel, you know?
Right. And they're like, put away your comic books. You got to read the chapter book.
Yeah. But you give them something like Dogman, they can get through it. And so they knock one out and they're like, well, if I could do that, I could probably read another one.
Right.
And then I could probably read another one. And then and they're hooked, you know? And that's what I get frustrated with comic books in general, is the industry's become so like, this is a comic book and this is how you make sequential art. It's like, no, you're just a piece of this bigger puzzle. And you need to find a way to speak to those people. Like, now I see they're doing young adult novels of their characters, of like Marvel characters. And I'm like, now, like, no, like kids don't want to read a novel. Like find your Dogman creator and have him do a Marvel young adult thing, you know? Like,
and you know, box. Exactly. And you know, if they think out of the box, they generally do better. Like when I was taking my kids to the library, you know, my kid wasn't into superheroes, but he was into like pets. He liked dogs and things. And so I took him in. There happened to be like this superhero book about Supergirl and her Crypto, the super dog. And it was like a kind of comic book, kind of book. And he's like, Dad, I want to read that. I was like, anytime my son says, Dad, I want to read that we are getting that book. You know, there's no question about it. We are getting that book. It's so hard to get him to read that if he's going to point out to something, I'm going to do it. And the thing is, at the time, he was like 6. So if he's reading it, that means that I'm reading it, because I have to tell him what every other word is. And so, you know, I'm reading it. And I kind of look at it as like the brilliance of Pixar, which was to say, we're going to make cartoons and they're going to be for kids, but you're going to really, really like them. And if you adults really, really like them, you will keep bringing your kids to our movies more and more and more. And that's sort of the, and I think about this, and I don't know your experience with comics and books, but when I was in 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, the last thing I wanted to be told was that something was too adult for me. It's like, don't tell me that, because that's exactly what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And so, I think about it when I write, and I think about it when I read, is I want good stories. I don't want to give my kids just crap. I want to give them something that there's going to be that twinge of real solid storytelling there, or real solid characters, or something real that you're going to respond to and take with you after you leave that book. And I love that. And so that's what I want to do when I write. I'm not going to say that I'm necessarily very good at it, or that I always do it, but that's what I'm shooting for, is, to give you a fun story, to give you an entertaining story, but maybe just there's a slight bit more that I'm going to leave you with, that you're going to take with you after this, and you're going to like and respond to.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's what it all comes down to. I don't want to sit here and bash on the new Wonder Woman movie, but
No,
me,
less.
to me, like, the biggest fault in that movie was the runtime, because you feel every minute of it.
Right.
And so the movie didn't feel fun. And that was one thing that was so great about the first Wonder Woman movie, was that it did feel fun. It felt light and quick on its feet, and I think that's the truth. I think that's part of why something like Undiscovered Country I'd rather read and trade, is because it feels fun to get all that information over like an hour and a half sitting there reading it. But when I'm reading it month to month, I'm like, this is so much information. It's not even fun, because I'm trying to fit it into like this 30-minute window, and it's just not possible,
Right.
It's like an expectation thing,
Right. And, that's the great thing about it. It's funny, because I was talking to 2 different friends at about the same time. And one of them was talking about, he's a big fan of Frank Miller. And Frank Miller used to take a look at books, and if there was too many words, he would say, "Oh, this book has too many words. It feels constipated." And so, and then I have another friend who picked up a couple comics, and he said, if a comic of floppy is not wordy enough, if you get through it too fast, if you think about it, okay, a Kickstarter comic costs what, $5 and $3 shipping, maybe more. I understand that, but if I'm spending $8 on this, I don't want to spend 3 minutes to read it, is what he said. And so he wants something that has more bang for the buck, and so there's more density to it. So the great thing is, you don't have you only have to find that spot for your comic. So for some comics, it could be next to no words, and samurai action, and that's all you see, and there's 4 words in it. And on the other end, you can have Undiscovered Country, where you're just nonstop words. But so that's the other thing about it, is comics can be those things. The great thing about it is, with comics, there's so many different comics in this world that you can read, that to find your place in it, you don't have to be everything for everybody. Like a Wonder Woman movie. A Wonder Woman movie costs so much money. They have to make so much money back on it, that it has to be everything for everybody. My comic costs not very much. I don't make very much at it. It doesn't have to be everything for everybody. It has to be this for as many people as want it. And so that can be the thing that I focus on. And for me, talking about Wonder Woman in movies and comic book movies, is where I've come to is, there's too much CGI, but it's not the CGI. There's too many of these action sequences. Like, for me, more and more, the things that I go to see the movie for are the things in between the action sequences. Like, I think about the first Wonder Woman movie, and the thing that got me was the relationship between Diana Prince and I can't remember his name now. Yeah, Steve Traynor. Is that his name?
Trevor.
Trevor?
Steve
whatever
Trevor.
his name is.
Yeah, I'm
Chris
terrible
Pine.
with his name.
Chris
Yeah,
Pine.
I always
Chris
go to Chris
Pine
Pine, and
and
I'm
Gal
like, I don't,
Gadot.
the character's name is
When they're buying clothes in the 19 teens for her to wear and having the witty banter and going back and forth, and you get into the character stuff, that could be the whole movie for me. I don't need any more of these action sequences. I just want this character stuff. That's actually why I'm coming to this movie. Why I keep coming to Spider-Man movies is because I like the Spider-Man character. It's not because I need to see him beat up on Venom or Doctor Doom or Doc Ock or the Green Goblin for the 4th time, whatever. It's, I want to see Peter Parker having these weird relationships, and having, just these conversations. And the more character that you can get in there and the more interesting that can be, that's the movie I want to see. Forget all the CGI sequences, because every superhero movie is going to have that. It's the good ones are what they do in between that sell you. If they do this well, it's a good movie. If they do this poorly, it sucks.
Yeah, and I mean, I was having a similar conversation earlier today, actually, about the way that storytelling has become, at least on the screen. There was a time where people, there was a chance you wouldn't see an episode of a show, but they didn't want to lose the audience. So
Yeah,
every episode was like its own thing, very episodic.
Yep.
And then you would go to the movies, and like I was just watching Tango and Cash the other day, like this was a time period. This was a time period where like
you were really desperate for entertainment.
Well, I had never seen it. My friend was like, me and my friend have never seen it, but we've always heard the references, and so we were like, let's watch it to see what everybody's always talking about,
Okay.
And it's weird, but like, in that time period, you went to a movie and you got like, you felt like you went away with this character, and in that movie specifically, it's like 20 minutes into the movie, 30 minutes into the movie before the two characters even meet. Like, the amount of time they spend building each character before they even meet each other is completely different. Like, movies today, it's just like run and gun,
Right.
But we've also developed this sense of storytelling where we can keep it connected. And so you see like these 10 episode series on streaming, that's where the storytelling's really at now, because you get these hour-long episodes to really like dig into the character, and some episodes might not even have an action piece, but worst case scenario, it's a 10-minute section of an hour-long episode, and it gives you more of those in-between moments that movies seem to be losing, because I guess they're trying to compete with TV now, and they just can't keep up, because your movie's got to be 2.5 hours, but it's boring. Nobody wants to sit there that long.
Right. Exactly. You're exactly right about that. And, again, it goes back to comics, is it episodic? Is it serialized? Are you writing for the trade? Are you writing for the floppy? And again, the nice thing about comics is kind of like the streaming on TV. It's, there's so many different options that you can be your own thing. And, I think it's true with TV, and I think it's true with comics, which is when a series finds their own voice and is sort of forging their own path, it's 10 times more interesting than if it's doing the exact same thing, if it's got this formula that it's doing over and over and over again. I was watching again, because I watch a lot of kids shows now, was watching a series of unfortunate events on Netflix, and I had never read the books, and so was following through it, and it's willing to take so many risks and have adult humor in this kids show and do all these different things and really forge their own path. It didn't feel like any other kids show I'd ever seen, and I was willing to go with that for 3 seasons, just to see where it went, because I like the characters, because I like the storytelling, because I found it interesting. And the other one that we're watching, that I'm watching with my son, is Avatar: The Last Airbender. And people have told me how good it is, and then I have watched it, and it's like, wow, this is good. And there's a show, it's a martial arts show, and it could have been the stupidest thing in the world, where just 30 minutes of martial arts, and then they go and they have 30 more minutes of martial arts. And instead, They do lots of different things, and they try different storytelling techniques, and they let their characters be wrong, and they let their silly characters have real emotional reactions to things. And it's like, this is a kid's cartoon. Nobody did this. They had such faith in their storytelling that it paid off it just paid off so well, and I'm amazed by it.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think that was, one of the things that caught everybody really, but especially me by surprise about Game of Thrones when that started, was like anybody can die,
Right.
like nobody's ever safe. And that kind of set a new standard. And I recently started watching The Expanse, and it's kind of the same.
Yeah.
Like I just finished the first season and it really pays off, but the whole season I was like, what is like I understand what's going on with each character, but how does this all relate, And
Right.
like those last 2 or 3 episodes, it all comes together in such a great way that you're just like, this is different. Like it had to be especially since it started on Sci-Fi. I can only imagine it was a gamble to try to believe that your audience was going to stick around to the end of a season to find out how it pays off. And
right.
They landed it, but there was a lot of risk being taken there. I feel like that show probably struggled a lot back then,
Yes, it did. Well, and the one for me even before that was when they did the reboot of Battlestar Galactica.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, when Sci-Fi really invested money in that, and it was not like your old Battlestar Galactica. And thinking about it now, it's like that's a really brave decision, because nowadays, if you're going to reboot something, you have to be incredibly faithful to the original, or you risk losing all your fans and your IP. And what are you doing?
Fan service and nods and references, and
right,
they didn't really do any of that.
Right, and that's what I loved about it. It was willing to forge its own path, to be risky, to take its own risk, and it really paid off the viewers because of that. Because you didn't know what was coming, and you didn't know how it was all going to work, and it wasn't that loyal to the original, but it was just loyal enough. And that's again the storytelling that I like are the people who are willing to take those risks, forge their own path, and not kowtow to the bean counters who are saying, no, you can't do that. So yeah, I mean, to bring this back, I mean, that's the comics that we want to do. It's the comics that DW wanted to do. And, we wanted to, one of the things we did when we launched Miskatonic High, Ryan and I said, look, there's enough crap out in the world. There's enough politics, there's enough hardship. Let's do a comic that's 20 minutes of fun, so that people, escapism isn't necessarily a bad thing, and come have fun, enjoy this, and we'll put out a good comic and people will respond to it, and we'll make good characters and people will follow it. And when we met DW, he wanted to do the same thing. And so the crossover happened really easily, and it turned into a really fun adventure. And we sent it out to people to read it, and they came back and they're like, this is a really good adventure. This is exactly what you want to do. It introduces the characters to people who have never read the books before. They get the horror and the comedy side on Miskatonic side. They get that, Lovecraft P.I. is this gruff private detective, and he sees, horrible things, and he deals with horrible things, and, introduces those and has a good adventure. It's, it ties it up in a bow at the end, and people enjoyed it. And, again, if you're willing to do those things, take those risks, and just have fun with it and do your own stories, largely you're either going to be successful or, at least you're not screwing up the same old ways.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I really enjoyed this first issue specifically because of that. Like, there's a sense of like fish out of water with Lovecraft in this, but at the same time, like, he's not just like some kind of bumbling idiot that can't operate or function because he's in a strange place, and I thought that was really cool. It reminds me of like right now DC, they just launched this all this new stuff. They had one book called Generation Shattered, and it's this character named Commandy, and he's like moving through time and basically collecting different characters from different parts of time.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And he specifically grabs Batman from 1939.
Okay.
And it's kind of a weird choice, but one thing I really liked about how they play Batman in that is like he is a fish out of water. Like they bring him into basically the future from 1939,
Right.
and he has that same sense of like fish out of waterness that Lovecraft has in this story. But he also, like, whenever the fight goes down, he's not like messing everything up.
Right.
It's not all slapsticky, and that's kind of how Lovecraft was here too. Like when it came down to the brass tacks, he knew how to get back to business, and he was never concerned with like, where am I at? What's going on?
Right.
And so I thought that was really cool. And then the way that plays against the kids, it, like I said, it makes it feel like Scooby-Doo or something, doing a crossover. I really enjoyed it.
Right. And that was the idea for the first one. And the second one, it's kind of like we inverted it. So it's like when the kids went back to 1932, they're the fish out of water, and so it's like, they're trying to get cell service in 1932, and that's not going to happen. And, but again, just because, they're kids who have dealt with monsters, they're not incapable of doing things, and so that's kind of the fun part of it on that side of it too. And, when we first discussed doing the crossover, I had read his book number 2, which took place in Louisiana. And we had just done issue 9, which involves a character who came from Louisiana. And so we thought, oh yeah, that'll be cool. We'll just bring those characters in and do that. And so I took that idea to Ryan, who's my artist and co-creator on Miskatonic High. And the nice thing is Ryan is like a game master, or a former game master for like doing role-playing games. And so he's got a real good, solid sense of plot. And so I was like pitching this to him, and he's like, that's so stupid. He's like, don't do that. And he's like, look, you're taking a character from 1932 and bringing them to Miskatonic in the future. It's a fish out of water story, dummy. And it's like, yeah, you're right. So again, you just gotta sometimes you just gotta forget the first idea and go with the better idea. So that was the idea, was take him, make him a fish out of water, because it's perfect for sort of that comedy aspect of it. But it also brings in so many other different aspects of it. Like, yeah, he gets down to brass tacks, but also he's not of this time. So you have characters who are talking to him, and he's talking about smoking cigarettes, and it's like, everybody smokes, and it's like, no, you don't. And you have teenagers talking to him, and it's like, in their mind, they can't comprehend a world where everybody smoked, and another one was they were talking about like Japanese cars, and it's like, to him, Japanese people make toys because that's what they did back in the 30s. They didn't make machinery, and maybe he said something that wasn't polite, and one of the character calls him on it. And it really gets to the idea of different times and different cultures and how culture changes over time. And so you can do these things with comedy that's a little bit smarter than just slapstick comedy, like you said. And for me, that's something that I really like, because we tend to forget our history. We forget that people back then were actually people. They weren't just Steven Spielberg movies. So we had a lot of fun with that, and then taking the kids back to 1932 and showing what 1932 was like and how it was insane, especially for this riot on the mall of Washington DC Mall with these World War I veterans and sending the army in. And it's just, anyway, yeah, I highly recommend people getting it, because it turned out so much better than I was expecting it to turn out. So
yeah, I mean, like, again, credit to the way you did it. Like the cigarette scene you're talking about, right? Like, as the reader, I was reading that and it was so cringy, but not like oh, he shouldn't have wrote that dialogue, or no, like, it was so perfect, because in that moment I felt the way the kids did. I was just like, oh yeah, like everybody did used to smoke. Like that was just an accepted thing. I think it's probably John Mulaney. He has a joke where he's talking about like the guy. He's like, oh yeah, the doctor took out my left lung. They said something was wrong with it. He said they're smoking a cigarette still. Like, like, so to me, that's how I felt. I was like the kids. I was like, oh god, like, oh yeah, they did used to do that.
Well, yeah, and for me, it's like, I have kids, and so they are very much in this moment of this world right here, right now. And then I have a dad who is very much not of this moment, and he's of an older generation, and so seeing the two of them interact and trying to get them to communicate in a way that they can understand that his world was like this and he can understand their world is like this, like that to me is really interesting, and it's something that we as Americans don't do very well. Like, either you're here or you're here, and there's nothing in between anymore. And for me, the really interesting thing is putting them together and having them interact. And it doesn't have to be kumbaya, everybody see eye to eye. You can have conflict there, and that makes it interesting. And one person doesn't have to be right, and the other person doesn't have to be wrong. It's, they can be of their times and talk about it. And I think that's fun, and I think it's interesting. And again, it's not necessarily safe, but that's the point.
Yeah, I mean, I have kids, and my parents are, just on the brink of 60, and watching that gap is like, it's infinitely interesting, to watch my 3-year-old show my mom how to use her new iPhone 12.
Yep.
Amazing. It makes me miss American Home Videos and stuff, whatever. Right. It was like you would see random things, like that's how it is with the kids. It's like my mom is so baffled by her cell phone, and then my 3-year-old's just like, oh yeah, look, you press YouTube,
right.
knows how to do it, and like the look on my mom's face, like it's always entertaining,
Right. And the thing is, I've found that, not to get too heavy on it, is, people don't talk to each other anymore. It's like the 3-year-olds, the 7-year-olds, the 10-year-olds are talking to other 3-year-olds, 7-year-olds, and 10-year-olds, and the 60-year-olds are talking to other 60-year-olds. And so it's like we're not having the same conversations about lots of things that we probably should be having the conversations about. So for me, it's like, let's start having those conversations. And even if we're just talking about phones, or even if we're talking about, how Netflix works, or, even if we're talking about, whatever, it's conversations are really, really good. And I like having those conversations. I like that the comic can have those conversations, even if we're not having them in real life. So yeah, I really enjoy that. I hope that means something to somebody, but even if not, I think it's a really fun part of the book for people to read, because we do it for comedy, and it works, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, I really like the way that you play Lovecraft in this, because he has the air of fish out of water, and it's funny, but you also don't take him to this place where like suddenly he doesn't know how to dodge a punch or throw a punch or how a gun works, he's competent. And I think that's what makes the story so good, is like there's this comedy when you're character building, but then you get into like these serious moments, and he still knows how to look for a clue, because it's just basic stuff, and to me that's where it could have all fallen apart, but the way you held it together and kind of characterized him really grounds the story into something that's pretty authentic and very enjoyable.
Right. And one of the nice things about having that character in our world, so our comic is really about teenagers sort of discovering this stuff. So they don't have a whole lot of role figures that they can go to and talk to about this stuff, who like have been through the wars and, have dealt with a lot of monsters and a lot of this stuff and the supernatural stuff to deal with. And so one of the real nice things was, by bringing this character in, it was all of a sudden like an authority figure that hadn't been in the comic before, that they could interact with. Like, they could be a little bit more silly. They could be more teenagery because they didn't have to be the responsible ones. But also, he brought a perspective about the supernatural that they hadn't dealt with before. Like, there's one character who's sort of going through her own thing, and she's having a hard time with it. And he didn't sugarcoat it for her. Everybody else in her life sugarcoats it, and it's like, oh, maybe this isn't going to happen, maybe it's not going to happen, maybe you'll be fine, whatever, you're dealing with it, be in the moment, experience your life and all this. And he's like, no, it's going to happen, make a plan for it, and don't put it on other people. It's like that real authority of American responsibility, that older generation of, we dealt with this shit, and we just, sorry for swearing on your podcast, we dealt with it, because we had to. It was there and we dealt with it, and I liked that personality and bringing it in, and it brought a new flavor to the conversations and the characterizations that we hadn't had before that I really liked. And I felt really grateful that DW let me bring Lovecraft into that world and let me do a lot of things. Like I was a little worried that he wasn't going to let me do some of the comedy about, this, but again, the nice thing about it is he came in with no ego. I don't have a humongous ego about it. And so, he saw that the comedy was working and he jumped on it and he said, yeah, let's do it. Let's go here or there. And in the second one, we have a spot where he's talking to some World War I veterans, and he gets a little patriotic. And before that happens, he has the teenagers say some things about the World War I veterans. And he sort of pulled the punch on it. Like he didn't have them say, like, actually insult the World War I veterans. And, I know teenagers, they don't pull their punches. So, I told him, look, have this conversation, but have the teenagers say something disparaging about the World War I veterans. Say that they're hicks or say that they smell or whatever it is, so that when he comes up and has this patriotic moment about being a World War I veteran and what it means to him, it lands harder because the teens didn't understand, because they didn't pull their punch. And so that's sort of what we did was, he allowed me to not pull the Lovecraft punches, and I allowed him to not pull the teenagers punches that, really make these characters. We have a thing on Miskatonic High. I sent an issue once out to a reader first, to get their point of view, and I'm very grateful what they did, and they fixed the comic book a lot. But one of the things that they wanted was there was two teenage boys having a conversation about sex. And they were using conversation that was obviously locker room conversation. You know how boys are with locker room conversations. And they suggested to me, go ahead and tamp it down because people won't like those characters if they read that. And my point of view, and in talking with Ryan about it, is that's not how teenagers are. Teenagers say lots of stupid things that have consequences and annoy people, and people don't like them, but it makes them more interesting and makes them more real characters, and you respond to those characters more because of their failures rather than if they're milquetoast and they're always right. And so we kept it, we put it out there, and one of the things that people have really responded to is our characters aren't always likable. They're teenagers. They are not always likable, but that's why you respond to them, is because a character needs to move through the story and needs to grow through the story. If you start off with your character being perfect, nothing happens.
Yeah.
They don't change it all. But if your character is wrong, annoying, whatever, and goes through these things and ultimately finds who they are as a character, whether good or evil, or, they fall into a pit of despair or whatever it is, that's the story. That's what you respond to. That's what's interesting about those characters that makes you want to follow them. So that's what we did. And so it's okay for our characters to be terrible teenagers, because I have a 10-year-old and he's turning into a terrible teenager, and they say what they say. And so, So again, we let him, be the character that he's going to be. And, we let our characters be the annoying teenagers that they're going to be.
Yeah, I think that's awesome, because it sounds like you're talking about, like, character growth in a crossover, So
Right.
like, is this canon to your universe? Is this going to be something that's imprinted into Miskatonic High, or is this
Absolutely.
just
So I was talking to DW, and it's imprinted into both. So I'm already writing sort of a follow-up story to this, in Miskatonic High, using some of the events that goes next. And he's doing the same with Lovecraft P.I. And, to your first point, one of the things that I thought about when we talked about doing the crossover was what crossovers I liked when I was younger. And again, this is dating me, but there was this comic book. So I was an X-Men kid. I was a Chris Claremont X-Men kid. That's who I was. I read every issue of X-Men I could get my hands on. And in the 80s, he put out a miniseries called Fantastic Four versus the X-Men. Completely forgettable name. Marvel marketing came to them and said, look, we're going to do this. It's not a question of if you want to do it, we're doing it because we can sell this. And he said, okay, well, let me write it. And so he did. And he took his characters, and there were consequences to the characters. Kitty Pryde, Shadowcat, whatever she's called now, was going to die. She had been in an accident and was going to die. And they needed Dr. Doom to help them heal her. And so there was going to be consequences. And so Kitty Pryde, knowing that she was going, if she was going to take this help from Dr. Doom, was going to put the X-Men in Dr. Doom's power forever, decided maybe it would be better to just die rather than to do that, to just let her life go. And little Franklin Richards comes up and he sees this happening, and he's a little kid and he doesn't understand what's going on. And he is crying his eyes out for her to come back and not give up. This is a thing in what could have been a throwaway comic. And it's real character development, real characters dealing with real things that aren't safe. And that has lingered with me. God, I'm old now. So for 30 years, geez. And so when I was thinking about this, the one thing that occurred to me was there needs to be some character development in it. There has to be something in here that fans are going to take away and say this crossover was worth it for more than just a fun action story. And so for me, again, it was having him come over and talk to this girl who's dealing with her thing and really just being blunt and saying, look, you need to face the fact that you don't have a future. You are going to have to deal with that. And it's such a hard thing to tell somebody, but it's also a real thing, because I think we all know that there are situations like that where you get a diagnosis or whatever, and people will sugarcoat it for you, but there will also be those people who don't and tell you it straight. And even though it's not sugarcoated, you will appreciate them for having said that, because at least they're honest. And so that's something that I wanted people to take away.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's really cool that you had these characters that could bounce like that,
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, you have these kids, they don't really have a guiding figure. Like,
right.
It's not like Buffy where she's got the librarian to give her all the answers,
Right.
So that's really cool that a character that comes from a different era that's kind of known for that kind of blunt personality,
Mm-hmm.
and just straight shooters,
Mm-hmm.
and the type of character that can give that type of growth, because I think that's awesome, because there are so many crossovers. I grew up on Power Rangers and Ninja Turtles,
Sure.
and they had a crossover comic miniseries just like a year ago now.
Okay.
And that one, they basically took them all. It's all out of universe,
Right.
So there's all these cool things that happen. Like Shredder takes the morpher and like becomes Green Ranger Shredder. Like, how cool is that?
Right.
But it's all out of continuity, so there's no consequence to it, And so the idea that you did a crossover and you wanted it to mean something, that it's something that happens to these characters in this timeline, I think is really interesting. And again, it's another really different thing that you're doing.
Right. And, again, here's the thing. So it's kind of a double-edged sword when you're doing these really indie comics, is you don't have anybody telling you not to do something. But when you do something stupid, you don't have anybody telling you not to do it. So a lot of times you luck out and you find new ground that you can cover and you can do it. And sometimes you make comics and people are like, what the F was that? And, that's sort of the nature of indie comics is, you want to surround yourself by people who can lead you to telling good stories, but also tell you when you're being stupid. And, for me, I'm lucky that Ryan is that person. I write a script, I send it to him, he reads it, and he comes back and he says, look, this works, this doesn't work. Can you go fix this? And not a lot of artists are empowered to do that. A lot of artists are for hired guns, essentially, that, the writer is like, no, it's all mine. It's all mine. It's all mine. You write what I say. Here's the full script. I did my whole Alan Moore thing, and I wrote a panel that was 3 pages long, and you will draw every little bit of it. And that's not what I do. It's not what we do. I send it to Ryan. He comes back and he has notes, and he says, this works. That doesn't work. What if we do this? What if we do that? And I say, yeah, I have enough trust in him to know when he says something doesn't work, that it doesn't work. Like, it's not a question of he's right or he's wrong. It's, we got to be on the same page as this, or it's not going forward. So I'm really lucky in that regard, and I was really lucky on this crossover that DW is really good too, that I could give it to him and he could come back and say, look, yeah, let's change this or change that dialogue or do this. And he was absolutely right every time he did it. So
yeah, that's awesome. I mean, it's, credit to you too, to be a collaborator that can take that, because
right.
It's a give and a take, they could very well give you their opinion and you could not accept it, or,
right.
They could choose not to give their opinion because they feel like you wouldn't take it, so that expresses a lot of competence and security and confidence in your collaborative relationship with your creators,
Well, and that's another thing about comics that people sort of tend to forget. So a lot of people, again, not necessarily the people who are writing it to be a movie script, but and not that there's anything wrong with it, because a lot of these comics work and they're really good, but a lot of people write these things and they're like, this is my vision, and I'm going to see this vision through. And a lot of times what happens to them, the good ones, are they get an artist, and the artist puts their own stamp on it, and it goes from this and it goes up a level because the artist puts their stamp on it and turns it into something new. And it took me a while to realize this, is comics is a collaborative art form. It just is. Unless you're a writer artist, you have to work with somebody else. And early on, you tend to be like, okay, well, my ideas are good, and I'll pretend to listen to your ideas, but then we'll do my ideas. And the real hard part is saying your ideas and then shutting up and listening to what the other person says, and really, really listening and hearing what they say, and then going that direction, and finding the places where you can agree. And for me, usually I get Ryan's feedback and I read it, and something will tick me off and I need to go away and stew about it for about an hour or two, and then come back and read it again. I'm like, yeah, he's right about that. I don't want him to be right about it, but he is right about that. And then see that he says, okay, well, if we do this, then we can do that. I'm like, yeah, okay, yeah, I see how that works. And then, and then we can fold in this part, which I wanted to do but wasn't working. And yeah, we can do it all together. And it's, that's the exciting thing for me now. And, one of the things that we do, because we do standalone issues, every season I say, hey, is there anything that you want to do this season? And, for the second season, one of the things he said is, I want to do a noir story. And so I said, okay, well, I want to do a story about a ghost. What if we combine those two? And so suddenly we're doing a ghost noir. Okay. So yeah, we went there. And, and another one, he's like, yeah, let's do a time travel story. And I'm like, yes, let's do a time travel story. And so then we did a time travel story. And, it's a collaborative art form. If you listen to your artist, if you listen to your partners, they have really great ideas. And if your ideas and their ideas work together, it's so much better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think, like, for me, I think it's really cool in comics because you have like movies and TVs, right? And you have this huge team, and to put something off on film is a collaborative effort, but there's so many moving parts.
Right.
That any one thing could mess up the entire process,
Right.
And then probably the other extreme is like being a novelist, like this is your sole vision going into this novel,
Right.
And so comics like strikes that balance where when it's a 2 to 4 person team, you get this sense of collaboration that takes everybody's ideas and does make them better generally. Right. But at the same time, there's not so many moving parts that the whole thing can also just like fall apart,
Right.
And so I think that's something that, this exemplifies. You've taken 2 different characters, like 2 different universes, crossed them over, and yeah, great. The parts were great, but some of the parts is really cool. Like it all comes together in a very nice way, a very nice package.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah. So we have talked a long time.
Like right at 2 hours almost.
Yeah. How long do you normally go these for?
Oh, it varies. I've had some that are like 2 hours, some that are an hour. I've had some people.
Just if it's going to be 4 hours, I'm going to go get another drink.
No, I was just gonna say, go ahead and wrap up and kind of, I guess, like give your spiel about what the crossover is and where to find all that information.
Yeah, no, awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, so the crossover, this is part 2. You can find it on Kickstarter. It's called LOVECRAFT P.I. meets MISKATONIC High. It's a bunch of people living in a Lovecraft universe who are tangling in 1932 against a cosmic creature, along with the U.S. Army and a riotous group of World War I veterans. So, it's a happy-go-lucky story. We are on there for a little more than 2 more weeks. Now it's the 12th, so we'll be on there for most of January. You can find us on Kickstarter. You can find us at MISKATONICHighcomic.com. You can find Lovecraft P.I. I believe it's lovecraftpi.com, and Dave DW is going to kill me if I got that wrong. But yeah, and so on our Kickstarter, you can get the first issue of the crossover. You can also get all the old Miskatonic High issues. You can get all the 2 trades of Lovecraft P.I. You can really catch up on things. We got a lot of cool variants. We have an 8-inch model figure of our crazy cosmic creature. We have all kinds of pins and all kinds of stuff. So anything that you could possibly want, we probably have on there. So yeah, come check it out.
That's awesome. And you might have said it and I might have totally blanked, but you're on Twitter, right? How do you prefer?
I'm on Twitter at Miskatonic H. We're on Facebook, we're Miskatonic High. On Instagram, yeah, we're on the social media, as the kids say. We do not I'm sorry, we do not have Snapchat, we do not have TikTok yet, but I don't know what we would do for 8 seconds anyway.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I'm going to put all of the links and everything in the description, so everybody will be able to find that if you look below.
Okay, cool.
Listening to the audio version of the podcast, it's all in the show notes and it's all hyperlinked, so that's even easier to click through.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you.
It's been a blast having you. I really enjoyed reading the first issue of the crossover. I think the story comes together very well, like we've spoken about, and I'm really excited to see what you continue to do because I really like where your head's at as far as like traditional comics and what you're doing with Miskatonic and everything else.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and we're just having a blast doing it, and we're going to be around a long time. So if people want to check it out, we're on Kickstarter every other month putting out a comic. So come check us out, and it's really easy to get caught up or to give us a try.
Awesome. Well, thanks, man. It's been a blast.
Thanks, Ryan. This was so much fun.